And we start with the biggest event right now. The 50th edition of the G7 meeting has commenced.
Right, Jyotsna. Leaders of advanced economies are meeting for a 3-day summit to discuss various issues dominating the world at the moment.
And the first day of the summit, the G7 leaders agreed to use frozen Russian assets to raise $50 billion for Ukraine to help in its war against the Russian forces.
Well, the agreement was the centerpiece of the opening day of the annual summit, attended for a second successive year by the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
I can confirm that we have reached a political agreement to provide additional financial support to Ukraine of about $50 billion by the end of the year through a loan mechanism for the repayment of which the extra profits from Russian assets tied up in our jurisdictions can be used. We are not talking about a confiscation of these assets, but of the interest that accrues over time.
Also at the summit, President Biden and his Ukrainian counterpart signed a 10-year bilateral security deal hailed by Kyiv as historic. The deal signed on the sidelines of the summit aims to commit future U.S. administrations to support Ukraine.
Biden also sent out a clear message to the Russian President Vladimir Putin.
We've taken 3 major steps at the G7 that collectively show Putin he cannot wait us out. He cannot divide us. And we'll be with Ukraine until they prevail in this war.
Ukraine has signed a 10-year security agreement with Japan as well on the sideline of the summit.
Furthermore, Ukrainian President met with UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. During the meet, UK announced new sanctions designed to degrade Russia's ability to wage war in Ukraine. Sunak asserted UK's support for Ukraine. He said that they will always stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine in its fight for freedom.
Italy also hosted a session focused on investments and infrastructure projects in Africa. Projects include a rail corridor that will connect southern and central Africa. It also aims to bring telecommunication on cables and other infrastructure to the region. The infrastructure investments are meant to serve as an alternative to China's development efforts, which the U.S. and its allies say China uses to exert influence on developing nations.
Meanwhile, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has arrived in Italy. Prime Minister Modi is attending the summit as an outreach country, focusing on major global issues impacting both the global south and the world at large.
On day two of the summit, various topics expected to be on the agenda are the war in Gaza, migration, economic security, and artificial intelligence.
Pope Francis is set to become the first pontiff to attend a G7 summit. He will be addressing the subject of artificial intelligence at the conference. While he has previously called for global regulation of AI, warning of its danger to ethics and human rights. Well, for more on this, we're now being joined by Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis, who is a military expert and host of Daniel Davis Deep Dive on YouTube. Welcome to World DNA, Colonel Davis. Now, the G7 has agreed to use frozen Russian assets to raise $50 billion for Ukraine. The leaders are describing this as a game-changing. How perhaps will it impact the ongoing war, keeping in mind that the money is not expected to arrive until the end of the year?
It's just curious to me how many times in the 2.5 years nearly of this war I keep hearing something's going to be a game changer, and nothing has been a game changer, and this isn't either. I mean, just the least of which, because as you pointed out, this probably is not even going to start coming in toward the end of the year, and plus it's going down a slippery slope. When you start confiscating, whether it's the direct funds or whether it's interest off the funds, you're still seizing the assets of another country and using them for something else. And look, Ukraine is in a war against Russia. but the West is not in a war against Russia. And to take the assets of a country that we're not at war in, I think sets a bad precedent. And I'm not sure that it's going to work out good either in this case. And it's probably going to undermine the belief and the trust in the West, in this rules-based order we keep talking about. This doesn't seem to be following that. And I think it's going to come back to haunt us.
Right. Now, as you say that, President Biden has said that signing this bilateral agreement is a reminder for Putin that he cannot divide us. That's what he said. Now, considering that, Putin has been replying to every comment which comes from the West, how do you think Putin will reply to this?
Well, look, just on the first of it, that's not accurate. We are being divided. You see that Hungary made a special point of saying they want out of what the NATO forces are doing in regards to Russia. You have Turkey, you have Slovakia, definitely not on board with what's going on. So there are some fissures already showing up. You see these votes that have happened, especially in Germany and France, with voters moving away from supporting this war. So that's what needs to be taken care of more than anything else. And just saying the words that he can't divide us, that he can't wait us out, when evidence is existing that maybe he can and maybe we are, that's what needs to be taken a look at.
Right. Colonel Davis, like a lot on the agenda, not just the war in Ukraine and the war in West Asia. Also, Africa is also on the agenda with Italy trying to push for energy infrastructure in Africa. And of course, like I mentioned, the war in West Asia. How do you see or envisage the G7 summit shaping responses to all these global issues, especially when most of the leaders who are attending the G7 summit, they themselves are facing political tensions back home?
Yeah, you hit it right there. The war in Ukraine and between Russia and how those governments are handling it is a big issue, but it's not the only issue. There's a lot of issues that are part that the ruling parties in almost all these countries, and that's including the United States, because right now President Biden's not, depending on which poll you look at, is not hardly secure. And the leaders of these countries are going to have to start paying a lot more attention to their domestic audiences instead of taking them in directions that they'd appear to not want to go in if they want to stay in charge. And so I think in that regard, probably a little humility would be in order for some of these leaders of the G7 to pay more attention to their people and less trying to tell the people where they're going to go.
Right. Thank you so much, Colonel Davis, for bringing us all the details.
My pleasure.